Greetings and welcome to the Sanlam ESG Barometer series, where we will be digging deeper into the insights derived from the 2023 installment of the Sanlam ESG Barometer. My name is Andile Khumalo and welcome to episode 4. Environmental, social and governance imperatives have become fundamental to how businesses make investment decisions, and in 2021, flows into ESG investments reached a pinnacle when the market saw an estimated $120 billion flow to sustainable investments. The Sanlam ESG Barometer, in partnership with Business Day, is the first to assess how JSE-listed companies are actively improving environmental and social outcomes in the societies that they serve through their various activities. Now today, at the BDTV studios, I'm joined by two experts to discuss the theme, what is the importance of the S in ESG for financial services? First up, I have Nozizwe Vundla. She is the head of the Sanlam Foundation. And of course, I have my regular guest, the Chief Sustainability Officer at Sanlam, Mr. Abel Sakau. A warm welcome to you both, especially you, Nozizwe. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to start with you because we need to get some definitions correct. I think environmental is clear. I think governance is relatively clear because business people have dealt with governance generally in their own private environments. But social is not very, very clear. So from what I could deduce, this is about how the company relates to its employees, its customers, its suppliers, and its communities. Why is the S in ESG so important for companies?
So, Andile, I think it's important for companies to really be clear in terms of how they show up in society. And so whether, like you're saying, it is how companies treat employees, so labor relations, how it is that they engage with their supply chain, are their supply chains ethical or not, human rights, again relating whether to employees or to, in terms of their supply chain, is their supply chain ethical in the way they behave, etc. All of those things are important. For me in particular, in terms of my work that I do at the Sanlam Foundation, it's how we show up in communities. And whether we invest meaningfully in the communities where we operate and where we do business. So all of those things, yes, are very important in terms of how companies engage in that way, with the S.
And with the introduction and obviously the media attention that ESG has been deriving for the past few years, do you think there's now a difference between, call it CSI, and the social and ESG? And I'll tell you why, because companies have always done something for the communities, but it was always a donation to a local school, maybe build a local clinic. It was never really core to the business of what they do. It was always the other thing we do, but we're here to make profit, but we also take care of certain things in the community. With the advent of ESG, it seems to me that the S has gotten some prominence.
Absolutely, I'd agree with you. I think that, interestingly enough, ESG are called the non-financial, implications of a company, but actually they have very real financial implications in terms of the share price. So yes, companies traditionally in the past used to do a CSI, that really didn't have, if you would say, like implications for the bottom line. But ESG, the S in ESG does have an implication on the bottom line in many different ways. So I'd agree with you there that there has been that shift, and I think it's for the better because now there's a price, right, for companies that are not going to be investing in the S and not going to be, behaving correctly in terms of the S.
Absolutely. While I have you on what you do at the foundation, one of the episodes of this series, one of our guests was talking about the UN SDGs. And the point that she was making was that it is their recommendations as consultants to tell their clients, companies like yourself as Sanlam, that pick the SDGs that are closest to your core business. How did you, as the Sanlam Foundation, end up in your scope? I mean, I know that your scope involves a lot of education and other elements. Maybe take us through what the scope is and why is it that you decided on what you decided on?
Sure. So in terms of, the Sanlam Foundation operates in South Africa, but also in other Sanlam Alliance territories across the continent. So the three key pillars that we contribute towards in terms of South Africa, the BBBE scorecard, is socioeconomic development.
Right.
So that's where our education portfolio sits, and we start right from early childhood development throughout the entire value chain. We also do enterprise and supplier development, where we support entrepreneurs, which is so important in our context. And then we also do consumer financial education, where we target specifically low-income individuals, be they at work sites or blue-collar workers, or in other sorts of areas like in normal in communities, and we give them financial education. And the aim there is to eventually empower people, that hopefully one day we can break the cycle of poverty by empowering them with that type of knowledge.
Gotcha.
So that's a scope. We also do. We also run the staff volunteerism program of the Sanlam Group. And finally, like I said, we run CSI programs throughout the continent wherever Sanlam Alliance operates.
Got you. Abel, let me come to you. Going back to the issue of the focus on social versus perhaps the other elements of ESG, I typically find that the West seems to be quite focused and over-indexed the environment and climate change. And the social issues which probably impact more developing countries like South Africa and the rest of the continent are not as top of the agenda in places like Europe and the US as they probably should be in the continent of Africa. However, our companies tend to mimic those companies though, right? Because we almost follow the trend that they set on most things, whether it's technology, trends of how to treat employees. Are you a little concerned that maybe, JSE-listed companies and companies that are listed in other exchanges may follow that trend of indexing on environment when actually there are probably more compelling issues on social?
Absolutely, and I agree, Andile, with you. You look at Africa, we've got the youngest population in the world, and that is expected to continue for years to come. And when you look at, the developmental issues of Africa, whatever we do, we need to address the challenges that are faced mainly by the youth. And for us, on an African continent, the S has got a voice. Unlike the environment, there is no voice to it, but the S has got the voice. And we have experienced that in South Africa, where that voice actually came in the during the July unrest in South Africa. So it's important for us to understand the S better and not do ESG to chase ratings, because then you get to the top, but you are surrounded by a sea of poverty as a company. And South African history in terms of mining, where you suddenly have minerals that are depleted, mines have closed, you end up with ghost towns, they are all littered across South African gold belt, Welkom, Kaltenby. And it's that whole realization that development cannot happen without taking communities and other stakeholders along and making sure that economic activities does not result in short-term profit, but it results in sustainable profit that's able to catalyze additional economic activities, so that if that particular anchor economic activity ends, there is a plethora of other economic activities that are able to sustain communities. So for us, the S is important, and it has to have a voice that is extended in the rating agencies, so that for an African organization, the S weighs more, from a weighted perspective than the other elements, because that's our need today.
Right. Nosizo, let me come back to you. Back now to financial services. The industry that you are in. You are Africa's largest non-banking financial services player. You referenced the Allianz partnership. How then does the S now play when it comes to access to financial services? Because we've seen an advent of technologies, especially mobile technology, that's brought in and co-sourced and kind of co-attracted many people onto financial transactions thanks to the growth in development, especially around technology. What then becomes the role of players like Sanlam and other colleagues of yours in financial services to make sure that our people do get access to those services that sometimes seem unattainable unless you are of a certain income bracket?
Absolutely. So, financial inclusion is one of the key elements that is actually scored in the ESG scores. So that's a big focus area for us at Sanlam. So Abel, myself, and our colleague who's head of transformation work very closely together to create what we call shared value for the Sanlam Group. And part of that shared value is, like you say, insurance penetration in many African countries is extremely low. It's as low as sometimes 6%. Obviously, we want to be able to harvest and to be able to plow into those communities so that we are able to then have a market, right? So it behoves us therefore to invest in those communities. Like I was saying, we start right from the beginning of the value chain in terms of early childhood development and other elements like supporting SMMEs and consumer financial education. So what we try and do is to make sure that we have an ecosystem, right? It's not just about we want a client and it's just a purely transactional. We want to actually invest in the community so that we are able to develop over time a meaningful market and an active, engaged economy in each of the territories where we operate.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Abel, let's perhaps move now to some examples of what happens if you don't do it right? So we've got some examples that happened over the years, and I had a look at a few. I remember, if you remember what happened to Nike back in the 1990s, where they were criticized worldwide for labor practices at some of their manufacturing facilities. Things like poor working conditions, child labor, I remember, was a big kind of headline for them in that story. And the rest of the world turned their backs on Nike for a few years until they had to resolve that. Wells Fargo, somebody that's in your industry of financial services, they had some rogue employees open accounts without the consent of those customers. And that led to trust in that company reducing. And financial services is indeed all about trust. Just reflect for me some of the lessons we can learn, that companies can learn from these kind of headline stories when they don't pay attention to exactly where we started with Nozizwe, talking about what the S means. It means your customers, it means your employees, it means your communities, it means all the people that are a value chain, but more about them as part of society as opposed to just being a resource. Do you think companies were able to pick up any specific lessons? And if so, which ones for you kind of stand out?
Yeah, so I think, Andile, the first recognition that companies should understand is that when you look at your customers, your employees inside your organizations are your employees. But when they go outside your organization, they become your customers. And through their relatives are also part of your customer base. So companies cannot have a one-sided view to think that our employees are different from our customer. If you take that understanding to say your employees are your customers, whatever you do inside your company in terms of treating your employees, you must make sure you also extend it outside from an ethical basis, that you also treat your customers the same. Because your employees become the voice of a company outside the organization, but they are also able to come and rebel against the company when they are in communities. So this notion that employees will accept an ethical behavior because they are always interested in maintaining their salaries, it's a fallacy. It does not exist anymore, especially from an industry landscape, because then those are the employees who are able then to go outside and report the bad and ethical behavior of an organization. Because on the other side, they are affected by the decisions that companies make. So it's important that when you have a focus on ethical ESG approach on an S-lens, you are consistent in your behavior and you understand what matters. What matters is not about only profit, but it's on how you generate those profits, whether are they destructive or are they regenerative. So we're looking at regenerative profits from an S perspective.
Got you. Nozizwe, before I conclude, sometimes the S in ESG can be seen to be something that goes parallel to the organization and not part of the organization. And many organizations out there, their CEOs, their boards, and what they spend, the lion's share of their time and energy is about delivering the profits of the business. And this other thing called social is another thing. How do you ensure in your environment at Sanlam that the Sanlam Foundation, its objective, its activities, get the right support all the way from financial kind of budget allocation, but also just share a voice and their time and your time in the shine or in the light when it comes to engaging with the exco and the boards. How do you make sure you infuse that? And what are some of the lessons that you've kind of seen, the things that work to make sure that development and social impact sits in the core of the organization and not as a sideline?
So, I mean, one example I can give you is that the chairman of the Sanlam Foundation Trust is the CEO, Paul Henratty. So that should tell you something, that he's directly involved in terms of what the foundation is doing and how it is that we show up in communities. And so when he makes decisions as CEO, he's got at the back of his mind his role as chair of the foundation as well. And so it all integrates, Andile. You know, you can't do things sort of separately. So that's one example. But we also have a very involved in terms of our board of trustees. You know, Abel, myself, and like I was saying, our colleague Ray Ann, who heads up transformation, we all report into what's called the Social Ethics and Sustainability Committee. And so the entire Sanlam Limited board is also interested in what it is that we're doing in terms of, you know, how we show up in terms of the S. And I mean, I could go on and on and on. Our communities, the way that we engage with them, are interested. There's I think it's a little bit, you know, it's what's the word I'm looking for? I'm looking for.
It's one thing.
Yes.
It's integrated.
But also that it's fake. It's fake to say that things are separated. They're in silos. I think all of these things really do come into one. Yeah.
They come together. That's actually a very good point about the CEO being the chairman of the foundation. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much, you both, for your time. Really do appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of episode 4 of the Sanlam ESG Barometer series. Tune in again next time for episode 5. There we will be discussing prioritization of ESG impact over ESG rankings. Interesting topic. Until then, goodbye.